is it really you or is it an avatar?
What's the difference?
Oh, here, can you turn it up a little bit? It's such an honor to be in your presence, Bob Metcalfe. So Bob, you graduated in 5 years when you were at MIT, right? It should have been, your 50th should have been 50 years ago this year, but you took 5 years, am I right?
Except I choose to associate with the class.
Yeah.
So we have our 50.
So Bob, you took a few years to graduate, maybe 5, maybe you were interested in other things. Today, a lot of the tech stars are going to college and dropping out. You now are an incubator for talent at University of Texas, Austin. Vic, I don't know if do you remember Vic, who's one of your students who went to Magic Leap?
Absolutely, yeah, I met with him recently.
Yeah, he spoke right before, a few minutes ago. I'm curious, what's the difference in how kids can go from college to being players in the technology ecosystem from when you were there to a few years ago to where things are heading? Thought I'd open up with kind of you talking about talent and the pipeline to kind of envision the technology future. Because we want more Bob Metcalfes like you who created the building blocks that allowed society and humanity and the galaxy to be great.
So I hasten to point out that I did drop out of college. I finished my PhD, and then I worked for 8 years before starting a company. So I generally don't recommend to our students here that they drop out of UT to start a company. I think it's a bad bet. Now, there's some famous counterexamples, but it's probably not a good bet to drop out of school to start a company.
We had a few people on stage talk about the early days. And today is today. I know I asked you last year on the stage about AR, and you said, "You mean accounts receivable?" It's sort of a joke. So the memo of AR wasn't something top of mind for you. I'm curious. You helped create the network that allowed computers to talk to one another. What are some similarities to that period of time when you worked at Park and the early days to now, the early days of AR? Are there some similarities or there's some differences you might want to point out?
I only see similarities. Here we have a new technology. We're arguing about what it's called, AR, VR, MR, RR, whatever. And we all think it's imminent. Some of us think it's arrived already. It's been in the making for 20 years. It's very much like the arrival of personal computers and the internet.
Yep. So I was talking to someone, and he said, I study bats. And he studies 1 million bats leaving a cave at once. And I said, why do you do that? He said, because when we think of drones, they're not going to be drones in isolation. It's going to be a whole flock, a whole a network, a matrix. You came up with Metcalfe's law. Did you name it after yourself, or did someone else name it after you?
George Gilder named it after me in 1995 in Forbes magazine, but I've taken it up and I've been defending it ever since.
I'm curious, when AR becomes a thing and it becomes the way we interact with computers, what do you think might be some interesting applications of Metcalfe's law with AR?
Well, that sort of gets at the point I would like to make today, which is that we are in search of the killer app. The standard platform is forming, but what I'm here to say is it's very likely that the killer app will be networked AR. That is, the platform, the standards will very much involve networking if the birth of personal computing and the internet are any guide.
Great. So, what is the most interesting application of Metcalfe's law that you've seen, how it's been applied? Can you, and in doing so, you'll help people understand how you created, invented the oxygen for the internet?
Well, the big app that follows Metcalfe's law, although they've never heard of it, is Facebook. So Facebook came from nowhere based on the value of networking, and it continues to grow.
Your kids work at Facebook? They didn't tell them?
Well, I went to visit Cheryl and Zook, and Zook stood me up, and Cheryl had never heard of Metcalfe's law, but I didn't take offense. Their company is booming based on the value of connectivity. So, you know, when the internet came, the first purpose of the internet was sharing for cost reduction. It was called resource sharing. The goal was to save money so you wouldn't have to buy a bunch of computers. You could just share them over the network. That was in 1969. A year later, that was no longer the killer app. The killer app was communicating. Email popped up and became the killer app for a very long time. And then content came along, and then commerce came along, and then search and social. There's been an evolution of killer apps on the internet, and I suspect the same thing's going to happen in AR. I mean, right now, all I hear about is ARs and VR are useful for gaming, and they're useful for training. And I know somewhere in there is going to be the killer app, but I'm confident it will be network.
So I was with Don McCaskill, who was head of developer relations for Steve Jobs for 4 years. And it was interesting talking to him. I was like, well, what was it like working with Steve Jobs? And he had his take on it. He said, do you think some of the books get it wrong? And he pointed out a few things. You're one of the people that Steve Jobs really respected. I think you were like the most quoted on his death, after his death. Talk about what it was like working with Steve Jobs, and what are some good qualities that would be helpful now at this interesting time? What are some challenges that we don't want to be necessarily replicating?
Well, Steve was the champion of the standalone PC. He and Bill Gates in their early years thought of the PC as an escape from relying on the information technology people.
Had they heard of
instead of relying on them, you'd have your own. No, in defiance of Metcalfe's law, the standalone PC with its own printer and its own diskettes, that was their model. And it took some years to convince them to adopt the internet. Steve really didn't adopt the internet until he got to Next. And that's finally when I got him to put Ethernet, in the computer. So Steve picked up the internet around the time of Next, which is, of course, around the time that he went back to Apple, and it took off like a rocket ship.
So putting politics aside, what's your thought on net neutrality? And if you want to pass, you can pass.
I don't think I can put politics aside.
Okay, so let's do something else. I don't want to go there.
Net neutrality is a bad idea. It involves regulation by the FCC, and hopefully that's over now. Most people don't understand that we had to break the FCC and AT&T and IBM's hold on the internet to get it built. The specter of having the FCC return to regulate the internet is just horrible, because I can remember when it was true that the internet was regulated by the FCC. So I'm glad that we no longer have, we've undone the damage done by the passing of network neutrality regulation.
Yep. So 3Com, do you remember that company?
I do. Lasted for 30 years.
And you played a role there, and then you moved around in the company. We have a bunch of startups represented here. Do you want to talk about how humbling it can be to kind of go from one role to another role, and what to be aware of, and what things to think about to become a successful business? It's not just about cool tech.
No, it's fun to move around. The important thing about a startup is you have to be firing on all cylinders, and you can't tolerate either on-the-job training or dead wood, because they'll kill your startup. In my 13 years with 3Com, I got to have every possible job there, including writing code, including being chairman of the board, and it was great fun. So even though I was there for 13 years, I probably had 13 different jobs, and that's one of the fun parts of being in a small company. But I had those jobs with the assumption that I would do them well. And when I ran out of runway, or the term we used was when I redlined, then I quickly moved out of that position to another one. So, for example, I was head of sales and marketing for 2 years. And then it became too complicated for a mere engineer, so I had to step aside for a sales and marketing pro to take over.
So what do you think of the divisions in tech companies today between sales and marketing and engineering. I know Google, I think 98% of their revenue comes from sales. Is there a healthy dynamic there? What needs to be fixed from your vantage point? I know you're just an academic, but you're someone who's been one of these post-economic successful tech leaders.
What do you mean just an academic? That's a poor phrase. It's fatal, go back to your question, it's fatal to a company for the suits and the nerds not to get along. So the engineers, who call the salespeople suits because they play golf and drink a lot. The salespeople call the engineers the nerds. If that terminology or anything like it exists in your company, you're doomed. The nerds and the suits have to get along. The split between sales and marketing, that's more esoteric. Most people don't know the difference between sales and marketing. But that's another important distinction to make. Hey, let's talk about it. Isn't this an AR conference? Can we talk about AR instead?
Yeah. So my next question was, people, industry analysts say this is $100 to $200 to $1 trillion market opportunity in our lifetime. Do you believe that kind of hype? And what do you need to win in this space from what you've seen?
Well, I do believe that kind of hype, although that's the easy part. The hard part is when. The timing is the hard part to get. So, for example, when Ethernet first became a product, I declared as an industry analyst at 3Com that this 1982 was the year of the LAN, the local area network. And then I declared it in 83 and 84 and 85 and 86. The year of the LAN kept getting pushed out as the internet proliferated. So you're going to have the year of AR. It's been 20 years now since AR has been around, maybe, and there's probably been a bunch of years of the AR.
Ivan Sutherland, 40 years ago.
Since we met last time, I've had an AR experience I'd like to tell you about. You'd like to hear it?
Yeah. Bring it on.
I went to a conference in Kansas City, and there were some JPL guys there, Jet Propulsion Lab, and they gave me a HoloLens, and I put it on the stage in front of 1,000 people, and suddenly I was on Mars. I mean, talk about augmented reality. And now I did have Earth oxygen and Earth gravity, but I was walking on Mars, which was pretty amazing. And then I saw the rover over there. I was turning around, and there was the Mars rover. So I started walking toward it because I wanted a closer look. And with that, the JPL guy put his hand on my arm and said, "Bob, you're going to have to stop. You're about to walk off the stage." So what I learned is that we, even after 20 years of working on AR, we haven't quite worked out the user interface. If I'm going to be walking off the stage, there's two realities being marked there. Anyway, so AR is in the midst of happening. It has some things ahead of it. And as we talked about last time, the platform is emerging. The standards are emerging. And there's going to have to be a platform with standards of the many proposed. Remember, the World Wide Web was 3 standards: HTML, HTTP, and URLs. Tim Berners-Lee came up with those 3, not so good, but apparently enough standards, and off we went with a new platform called the World Wide Web. So one of the questions I hope is being asked at the conference is, what's the platform for the killer app of AR? Will it be a video platform? Will it be a gaming platform? What standard platform will be there? And once again, my argument is that whatever that platform is, it's going to have networking in it. And those people in the networking world are busily working to develop the new, I call gigabit internet, to serve AR, whatever it turns out to be. The augmented video mobile gigabit internet of things is coming right along, and it will be part of whatever the emergent platform is for AR.
So you mentioned, the story about the stage. I think VR, people are going to fall off buildings and get sick when they put the toaster on their head and are in this space. And I think AR, you see physical reference points, so you won't fall off the stage. And when you connect, I think the killer app for AR is definitely networking people together. What would you like Like, how would you sequence the moves that need to take place in AR for it to achieve success? Like, what are some building blocks, as someone who's seen a lot of these the 3 waves of computing come for this 4th one? What's the next 2 building blocks that you think need to be built that some of the people in this room can build?
Well, I don't think I have a sophisticated answer to that question. And I didn't go to CES, so I think a lot of the outline of what's happening
Don't you
was
live in
probably
Austin?
visible at CES, I guess.
It's not that far. Why didn't you go to CES?
Why didn't I go to CES?
Yeah. Treat you like a god there.
Yeah, I can't hear you, John, but I didn't go to CES because I've been there 14 times. And I don't think I have to go again.
All right. So I tell everyone I meet that I think your best is ahead of you. It's not behind you. Answer why that may be true. And it's been an honor to have you on our stage.
Well, keep in mind, we're going to have networking. So searching for the killer app, be sure it has networking in it. Remember, we had GPS in our cars before we had Google Maps, and then we had Google Maps, and proved to be very useful. But Waze is the next big step. That's where you're not just talking to the satellites, you're talking to each other. The cars are talking to each other. So Waze would be an example of networked AR. And of course, many of us are users of it. Anyway, thanks for inviting me today.
Actually, one last question. You were in the conference business for a while. How important is it for people, industry leaders to get together, investors, artists, engineers, designers? How important is it to kind of facilitate this community?
It's extremely important, which is why I agreed to get on the video with you here today. Getting the amazing group that you've assembled, a wide variety of people. It's out of that connectivity among this diverse audience that the answers to these AR questions will flow.
Let me, and just in closing, we've rebranded from AR in action, because you could say in action really fast, and it sounds like we're couch potatoes, to ARiA. And ARiA is a cool word, means like light, air. And in AR, you can get alternative reality, assisted reality. And so as some of these words evaporate, like heightened reality, mixed reality, I feel like this can kind of be more of the contextual computing. Do you think that's a good branding move for our conference?
That is very wise, because the term AR will not persist. There'll be other names. So an ARiA, isn't that like a solo in an opera?
Yeah. So that's not about networking. So we'll have to have a tagline. We love networking. So we'll get that in there. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Bob Metcalfe.